Hashtag Chapter 1. Gloom-Weavers and Other Nonsense. The air in the glimmering gullet was thick enough to chew. It tasted of stale fizz ale, unscrubbed alien sweat, and the greasy despair that clung to every port cantina in the outer rim. For Finnian Rook, it was the taste of home. Or, at least, the closest thing to it he'd had in the 10 years since he'd walked away from the only real home he'd ever known. He nursed a glass of something that tasted vaguely of industrial solvent and regret, his eyes scanning the motley crowd. Weequay pirates haggled over blaster parts in one corner, a Twi'lek dancer moved listlessly on a small stage, and a trio of grizzled prospectors argued loudly about hyperspace lane tariffs. It was a perfect symphony of the mundane, the transactional, the beautifully, blessedly uncomplicated. No prophecies, no destiny, no invisible energy field binding the galaxy together. Just credits, cargo, and the constant low-grade hum of a life support system. Finn ran a hand through his unkempt brown hair, the gesture automatic. He looked every bit the part he played, a cargo pilot on the wrong side of luck. His flight jacket was worn at the elbows, his boots scuffed, and a cynical tightness around his eyes had long since replaced the earnest curiosity of his youth. The Force was a story for children and zealots, a cosmic joke whose punchline he'd failed to grasp. For Finn, it was the sound of a closing door, the echo of a test he could never pass. He'd tried to feel it, to believe in it the way his masters had insisted. But his mind, stubbornly pragmatic, demanded schematics, data, proof. The Force offered only whispers and feelings. It was like trying to navigate a starship using poetry. A datapad on the table beside his drink chimed softly. He tapped the screen, his gaze flicking over the new job listing. Cargo 1-1, small-statured dignitary and 1-1 ward. Asterisk destination, Dagobah system. Uncharted coordinates provided upon acceptance, asterisk. Asterisk payment, 20,000 credits. Half on pickup, half on delivery, asterisk. Asterisk special instructions, discretion absolute. No imperial entanglements. No questions asked, asterisk. Finn's eyebrows rose. 20,000 was steep for a simple passenger run, even to a backwater mudball like Dagobah. The no questions asked clause was his native language, but the dignitary part gave him pause. Dignitaries meant politics, and politics meant trouble. Still, his fuel tanks were running on fumes, and his credit line was thinner than a Mandalorian's patience. He swiped to accept. Need the credits, he told himself, draining the last of his drink. Just another job. The pickup coordinates led him to a private docking bay on the far side of the station, away from the prying eyes of port control. His ship, the Stray Comet, sat waiting. She was a heavily modified Whitey 950 freighter, a rust bucket held together by scavenged parts, stubborn ingenuity, and a few prayers Finn wouldn't admit to saying. He loved her like a limb. She was logical. Her engines either worked or they didn't. Her navicomputer plotted courses based on established hyperlanes, not on a whim. She was everything the Force was not. Reliable, tangible, and blessedly silent. He lowered the boarding ramp with a familiar hydraulic groan, just as his clients arrived. The first was a being so small he barely came up to Finn's knee. Old, green, and deeply wrinkled, the creature leaned on a gnarled wooden cane and regarded Finn with large, knowing eyes that seemed to hold the light of ancient stars. He radiated a peculiar stillness, a calm that felt loud, in its own way. It was a feeling Finn hadn't experienced in years, and he immediately pushed it away, categorizing it as an anomaly. The second figure was a young woman, perhaps barely out of her teens. She had long pale blonde hair that hung down her back in a messy cascade and wore a simple, homespun tunic. But it was her eyes that caught him. The color of a distant nebula, they were wide and unfocused, as if she were looking at him and a dozen other things simultaneously. A string of what looked like butterale corks was tied around her neck. "Finnian Rook, you are?" the small one asked, his voice a gravelly whisper that carried surprising authority. "Just Finn," he corrected, crossing his arms. "You've got the first 10,000? The girl smiled, a dreamy, disconnected expression. "The Nargles have hidden the credit chip, I think. They do that when they're nervous about a new journey." Finn blinked. "The who?" The small being chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Pay him, Luna." In his pocket, the chip is. The girl, Luna, reached into the pocket of the little one's robes and produced a slim credit chip, which she handed to Finn. Her fingers were cool and brushed his for a moment too long. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Captain Finn. Your ship has a lovely aura. A bit lonely, perhaps, but very determined." Finn slid the chip into his reader. It beeped, confirming the transfer. He ignored her comment about the ship's aura. Space mad. Definitely space mad. Rich eccentrics, then. That explained the high pay. "All right, welcome aboard the Stray Comet," he said, gesturing up the ramp. "Strap yourselves in. The ride can get a little rough." No zigzags in the cockpit. He led them through the cramped corridor to the main cockpit. The space was utilitarian, cluttered with spare parts, empty ration packs, and a dog-eared copy of a technical manual. He slumped into the pilot's chair, the worn material groaning in protest. His passengers settled into the co-pilot and navigator seats. "Call me Yoda," the green being said, his large ears twitching as he took in the controls. "And this is Luna Lovegood." "A pleasure," Finn grunted, his fingers flying across the console, firing up the pre-flight sequence. The Comet's engines rumbled to life, a comforting, mechanical growl. "Your ship is infested with Wrackspurts," Luna commented conversationally, her gaze fixed on a point just above Finn's head. Finn paused, his hand hovering over the thruster control. "I'm sorry, what?" "Wrackspurts," she repeated, her voice airy. "They're invisible. They float in through your ears and make your brain go all fuzzy. That's why you can't remember where you put your hydrospanner, I expect." Finn gritted his teeth. 10,000 more credits. Just get them to Dagobah. "Right. Wrackspurts. I'll call an exterminator next time I'm in a civilized system." He pulled the Stray Comet from its docking clamps, the ship shuddering as it entered the station's magnetic guidance field. He expertly navigated the cluttered exit lane, the silence in the cockpit broken only by the hum of the ship and Yoda's soft, rhythmic breathing. As they cleared the station and the star-dusted blackness of open space filled the viewport, he punched in the coordinates he'd been given. The navicomputer chirped, plotting a course through a series of obscure, rarely used hyperspace lanes. Jumping in 3, 2, 1. The stars elongated into brilliant streaks of white and blue, and the familiar, disorienting tunnel of hyperspace enveloped them. The low thrum of the hyperdrive vibrated through the deck plates. It was a sound that usually soothed him, but today it felt different. It reminded him of another hum, a sound from his past, the resonant thrum of a lightsaber training room in the Jedi temple on Coruscant. "The Force is an ocean. Finnian." The memory of his master's voice echoed, patient but tinged with disappointment. Asterisk, "You cannot map it with a ruler. You must learn to feel the currents. Asterisk." But Finn had only ever felt the undertow, pulling him down into a sea of doubt. He'd excelled at the physical aspects, lightsaber forms, piloting, mechanics. But when it came to meditation, to reaching out with his feelings, he found only a void. His masters called it a block. He called it a reality check. He just wasn't special. The universe hadn't chosen him. It was a simple, logical conclusion. "The patterns are very troubled today," Luna said softly, breaking the silence. Her face was pressed against the viewport, her reflection staring out into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. "Patterns?" Finn asked, forcing his mind back to the present. "In the light," she clarified, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It's usually quite cheerful like a dance. But today there are Gloom-Weavers." Finn sighed. "Here we go again." "Luna, that's just a standard class 1.5 hyperdrive in action. It's a visual distortion caused by traveling faster than light. There are no Gloom-Weavers." "Oh no, they're not in the light," she said, turning to him. Her sincere, unblinking gaze was unnerving. "They're a shadow on it. They spin threads of fear and ambition. They follow people who want to control things too much. I think they're following us." Finn ran a diagnostic on his sensor array out of pure, mechanical habit. "Scopes are clean. No mass shadows. No subspace distortions. We're not being followed." He was trying to be patient. She was just a kid, probably raised on strange superstitions. Your scopes look for ships, she said, a hint of gentle pity in her voice. They don't look for feelings. The Gloom-Weavers aren't ships. They're the shape of a bad idea. A very cold, very sharp idea. For the first time, Yoda spoke, his eyes closed as if in meditation. Listen to the song, young Rook. Not just the words. Finn clenched his jaw. Song? Words? It was all just cryptic nonsense. Look, with all due respect, my job is to get you from point A to point B without getting blown up by pirates or an Imperial patrol. I deal in things I can see on a scanner and target with a laser cannon. Wrackspurts, Gloom-Weavers, and whatever else you've got in your menagerie are not on my threat assessment chart. Luna didn't seem offended. She just tilted her head. That's a shame. It's a very incomplete chart. You're missing all the most interesting creatures. Have you ever even seen a Crumple-Horned Snorkack? Can't say that I have, Finn said drily. They're terribly shy, she confided. Their horns can straighten out if they're happy, you know. Finn fell silent, focusing on the console. It was easier than trying to navigate this bizarre conversation. He was a pilot, not a zookeeper for imaginary animals. He flew the ship, he got paid, he moved on. That was the deal. That was the life he'd chosen. The rest of the journey passed in a tense quiet. Finn monitored his systems. Luna hummed a strange, meandering tune, and Yoda seemed to doze, though Finn suspected the old creature was more aware than both of them combined. When the navicomputer chimed, signaling their imminent arrival, Finn felt a wave of relief wash over him. The stray comet dropped out of hyperspace with a lurch, and Dagobah filled the viewport. Finn had seen his share of jungle worlds, but this was something else. It was a roiling, primeval sphere of green and brown, shrouded in a perpetual, misty twilight. But it wasn't the sight of it that hit him. It was the feeling. The moment they entered the system, the Force slammed into him like a physical blow. On Coruscant, the Force had been a placid lake, controlled and serene, contained within the temple walls. Out here, in the rest of the galaxy, it was a background hum, a whisper you could easily ignore. But here, the Force was a living, breathing, screaming thing. It wasn't a whisper, it was a roar. A chaotic symphony of life and death, of growth and decay, of predator and prey, all singing at once in a key he couldn't comprehend. The air in the cockpit suddenly felt thick, charged with an energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was raw, untamed, and overwhelming. He hated it instantly. Potent, this place is, Yoda murmured, his eyes now open and bright. Full of life. Full of something, Finn muttered, wrestling with the controls as pockets of atmospheric turbulence grabbed at the comet. It's playing hell with my sensors. He guided the ship down through the thick, swirling clouds. Massive, gnarled trees emerged from the mist, their branches dripping with moss and strange, bioluminescent fungi. The ground below was a patchwork of murky swamps and dense, knotted jungle. He found a relatively solid-looking clearing, barely large enough for the comet, and brought the ship down with a splash and a squelch. Engines whined into silence. The only sound was the incessant dripping of water outside and the chirps and croaks of 1,000 unseen creatures. The job was done. All right, we're here, Finn announced, unbuckling his harness. The cloying energy of the planet was already making his head ache. Dagobah. Credits are due on disembarkation. Then I'm gone. Yoda nodded slowly, a small, knowing smile on his face. A journey, this is. For all of us. My journey ends at the bottom of this ramp, Finn retorted, standing up. Let's go. He strode to the exit and hit the ramp control. With its customary groan, the ramp lowered, revealing a wall of thick, humid fog that smelled of wet earth and decay. The sounds of the swamp intensified. Finn turned back to his passengers. Well, this is you. It's been strange. Luna was already at the top of the ramp, but she wasn't looking out at the swamp. Her gaze was distant again, her head cocked as if listening to a faraway sound. Her dreamy expression was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp clarity. Oh, she whispered, her voice losing its airy quality. They found us. Finn's hand instinctively went to the blaster pistol holstered at his hip. Who's found us? There's nothing on the scopes. I did a full spectrum sweep on approach. She finally looked at him, and for the first time, he saw genuine fear in her wide, nebula eyes. "The Gloom-Weavers," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're threads. They're all over the air now. Cold and sharp." Before Finn could deliver a scathing reply about her imaginary friends, a high-pitched whine sliced through the humid air. A crimson blaster bolt sizzled past his head, so close he felt the heat of it singe his hair. It struck the inner wall of the ship's ramp, scoring a black, smoking gash in the durasteel just inches from his face. The smell of burnt metal filled the air. His training, buried under a decade of cynicism, kicked in instantly. He shoved Luna back, drawing his own blaster in a fluid motion. "Get inside. Seal the ramp." But it was too late. From the misty gloom of the swamp, a dark figure emerged, moving with an unnatural, predatory grace. And then came the sound. A sound that froze the blood in Finn's veins, a sound he had prayed he would never hear again. A sound that belonged to a forgotten chapter of his life, a chapter of failure and fear. The sharp, venomous snap hiss of an igniting lightsaber. A blade of brilliant, blood-red energy cut through the Dagobah fog, casting a terrifying demonic glow on the trees, the ship, and the faces of his passengers. Luna's nonsense had just become horrifyingly, lethally real. Here is Chapter 2 of The Crumple-Horned Snorkack and the Stars. #### Chapter 2. The Weavers in the Dark. The Stardust Drifter shuddered as it pierced Dagobah's upper atmosphere. The ship was a relic, a Corellian freighter of a vintage that made collectors weep and mechanics swear. For Finnian Rook, it was home, transport, and a 10-ton monument to his lowered expectations. He wrestled with the controls, the ship groaning in protest as gravity clutched at its hull. Outside the cockpit's grimy viewport, the planet was a maelstrom of emerald and ochre, a world drowning in its own vitality. "The clouds are quite agitated," a serene voice observed from behind him. "As if they're having a bad dream." Finn gritted his teeth, his knuckles white on the yoke. "They're clouds, kid. Full of ionized particles and swamp gas. They don't dream." Luna Lovegood, seated in the co-pilot's chair she'd claimed as her own, merely hummed. She had her bare feet propped up on the dashboard, wiggling her toes. "Oh, but they do. Everything does. The stars dream of burning. The stones dream of stillness. These clouds dream of rain. But there's something else tangled in them today. Something scratchy." He shot a sideways glance at her. Her pale, wide eyes were fixed on the swirling green mists, and she wore an expression of mild concern, the kind one might have upon discovering a spider in their teacup. In the 2 days since he'd picked them up from a desolate trading post on Sorgan, her pronouncements had ranged from the whimsical to the utterly baffling. His ship, she'd declared, was infested with Wrackspurts, tiny invisible creatures that made one's brain go fuzzy. It was the only logical explanation for his perpetual scowl. From a small, cushioned crate near the NAV computer, a pair of pointed green ears twitched. "A dream, it is," Master Yoda intoned, his voice a gravelly murmur that still managed to fill the cockpit. "But a nightmare, this one feels." Finn rolled his eyes, a gesture he'd perfected. "With all due respect, Master, it's just atmospheric turbulence. My scanners are showing." A piercing shriek cut through the engine's rumble. Not an alarm from his console, but a psychic wail that lanced directly into his skull. It was a feeling cold and sharp, a sliver of ice sliding down his spine. He flinched, his carefully constructed walls of disbelief trembling for a moment. He hadn't felt a tremor in the Force like that in a decade. He'd made sure of it. "There," Luna whispered, her voice losing its dreamy quality and taking on a sudden, sharp clarity. She pointed a slender finger past Finn's shoulder, towards the aft scanner display. "The Gloom-Weavers have found us." On the screen, a single crimson blinked into existence, closing the distance with impossible speed. It was a ship of a design he didn't recognize, all sharp angles and predatory grace, a stiletto of polished black metal against the churning green of the clouds. It was imperial in its brutal efficiency, but this was the High Republic. There was no empire. "What in the blazes is that?" Finn muttered, his pilot instincts taking over. He jammed the throttle forward, pushing the drifter's engines far past their safety limits. The whole frame of the ship rattled, threatening to tear itself apart. "A hunter," Yoda said gravely. "And the scent we carry." An energy bolt, brilliant and impossibly red, slammed into their port engine. The drifter screamed. Alarms blared in a cacophony of electronic panic, red lights flashing across the cockpit like angry eyes. The smell of ozone and burnt wiring filled the air. "Shields are down to 40%. Finn yelled, fighting a ship that now handled like a drugged panda. "Strap yourselves in. This is going to get rough." He threw the drifter into a spiraling dive, hoping to use the dense, turbulent atmosphere as cover. The black ship followed effortlessly, a shark in their wake. Another crimson blast struck their aft stabilizer, and the ship yawed violently. Finn's head cracked against the viewport, and for a second, stars exploded behind his eyes. Not the distant, cold stars of space, but hot, painful ones. "They're not aiming to destroy us," he grunted, wiping a trickle of blood from his temple. "They want aboard. To capture the Oracle, he comes," Yoda said, his gaze steady. Finn's blood ran cold. "Oracle?" He looked at Luna. She was no longer looking out the window. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The Weavers are so loud," she breathed. "They spin threads of fear. They're trying to unravel the ship's spirit." Before Finn could deliver a scathing retort about ships not having spirits, a deafening crunch echoed from the cargo bay. The magnetic clang of a boarding tube locking onto his hull. He was out of time. Unstrapping himself, he stumbled to a weapons locker welded to the wall behind his seat. His hand hovered over a standard-issue blaster pistol, the sensible, logical choice. But his fingers, acting on a memory deeper than thought, closed around the cold, cylindrical hilt tucked away in the back. It felt alien in his grip, a relic from a life that belonged to someone else. Someone who believed in things. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice tight. "Lock the cockpit door." "To face him alone, you will not," Yoda said, hopping nimbly from his crate. His small, three-fingered hand rested on his own miniature Jimmer stick. "I'm not facing anyone," Finn snapped, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'm getting rid of a trespasser so I can collect my fee." He ignited the lightsaber. The blade sprang to life with a familiar snap hiss, casting the darkened cockpit in a brilliant, defiant yellow light. The color of a sentinel, the Jedi who blended practical skills with the Force. A balance he had never been able to strike. The hum of the blade vibrated through his arm, a song he hadn't heard in years, and it felt like both a comfort and an accusation. He sealed the cockpit door behind him and moved down the narrow, sparking corridor towards the cargo hold. The main hatch was already being sliced open, a perfect, molten circle glowing cherry red in the gloom. With a final groan, the section of metal fell inward, and a figure stepped through the shimmering heat haze. The man was tall and severe, clad in form-fitting black armor that was starkly functional. A red-lined cape fell from his shoulders. His face was gaunt, framed by short, dark hair, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of absolute conviction. He carried a lightsaber, but it wasn't the elegant weapon of a Jedi. It was a double-bladed spinning ring, a weapon of intimidation and death. An Inquisitor's weapon. "Finnian Rook," the Inquisitor said, his voice a low, cultured baritone that held no warmth. "The Padawan who fled the test. I read your file at the archives on Coruscant. Lacks conviction. Over-reliant on empirical data. Unable to surrender to the will of the Force. A failure." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking the most tender, wounded parts of Finn's soul. He tightened his grip on his saber, forcing himself to stand his ground. "I don't know who you are, but this is my ship. Get off." The Inquisitor, Kalen Var, gave a thin, pitying smile. "Your ship? This heap of scrap metal is a coffin, and you are its pilot. I am not here for you, Washout. I am here for the child. The unfettered seer. The galaxy is a chaotic, untamed storm, and the future is its most dangerous current. I will bring it to heel. I will chart it. And for that, I need her. She's not a tool," Finn growled, the words surprising him with their vehemence. "She is a lens, Var corrected, his voice laced with the patience of a scholar explaining a simple theorem. And through her, I will impose order on destiny itself. Now stand aside. Var didn't move to attack. Instead, he raised a single gloved hand. The air in the cargo hold grew heavy, thick, and cold. Finn felt a pressure building in his mind, a familiar darkness he had spent years running from. You always feared the dark, didn't you, Rook? Var murmured, his voice seeming to come from inside Finn's own head. You feared what you couldn't measure or predict. You feared failure. Let me show you what real fear looks like. From the shadows behind Var, things began to coalesce. At first, they were just heat shimmers in the frigid air, distortions in reality. But then they took form. They were not solid creatures, but beings woven from shadow and despair, with indistinct, shifting limbs and voids where eyes should be. They moved with a twitching, unnatural grace, silent and utterly terrifying. They were exactly as Luna had described, weavers. They trailed thin, glistening filaments of pure darkness behind them, threads of palpable dread. The Gloom-Weavers. As they drifted closer, Finn felt their influence not as a physical threat, but as a psychic poison. His own deepest insecurities rose up to choke him. He saw the disappointed faces of his Jedi masters. He felt the crushing weight of his failure in the trials, the moment he'd been told he wasn't worthy. The shame burned hotter than Var's cutting torch. His arms grew heavy. His resolve crumbled. The yellow blade of his lightsaber flickered, as if in doubt. This was their power. They didn't attack the body. They devoured the spirit. You see, Var said softly, the dark side offers clarity. It shows you what you truly are. A broken boy playing at being a pilot. Give me the girl, and I will let you run back to your meaningless life. One of the shadow things lunged. Finn reacted on pure instinct, a desperate swing of his saber. The yellow blade passed through the creature with a sound like tearing silk, and the being dissolved into wisps of oily smoke, but the feeling of its touch lingered, a deep soul-level cold. Two more immediately swarmed him. He fought clumsily, his footwork sloppy, his mind a battlefield of his own making. He was so focused on the swirling shadows and the echoes of his past that he didn't see Var move until it was too late. The Inquisitor lunged, his spinning red blade a vortex of death. Finn parried, the clash of yellow on red sending a shower of sparks into the dark hold. Var was faster, stronger, his technique flawless and brutal. He pressed his attack, forcing Finn back step by agonizing step. Each blow Var landed on his blade sent a jolt of the Inquisitor's cold certainty through him. You fight to survive, Var sneered, locking blades with Finn, their faces inches apart. I fight for purpose. For a future free of the chaos your precious Jedi so blindly worship. Suddenly, the cockpit door hissed open. A future of chains you seek, Yoda's voice declared, sharp and clear. Luna stood just behind him, her wide eyes fixed not on Var, but on the Gloom-Weavers. She wasn't afraid. She looked curious. Var's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the Jedi Master. Master Yoda, the Grand Master of the Failing Order, hiding in the Outer Rim with a stray child. How far you have fallen. Fallen? No. Deeper I have gone, Yoda said. He raised a hand, and a stack of unsecured cargo crates behind Var lifted into the air and hurtled towards the Inquisitor. Var broke off his attack on Finn to slice through the crates with contemptuous ease, splintered metal and plastic raining down around him. But the distraction was all Finn needed. Luna now, he yelled. He didn't know what he was asking for, but he knew she was the key. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw no fear, only a strange, unwavering trust. They don't like happy thoughts, she said, her voice soft but clear. She closed her eyes and smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. She thought of a Crumple-Horned Snorkack she'd once imagined, with a coat like starlight and a sneeze that sounded like tiny bells. She thought of the taste of fresh moon puppy muffins. A soft, silvery light began to emanate from her. It wasn't the bright, powerful light of a lightsaber, but a gentle, pervasive glow, like dawn on a misty morning. The Gloom-Weavers recoiled from it, hissing like water on a hot plate. The threads of fear they had spun around Finn's heart dissolved. The crushing weight on his spirit lifted, replaced by a bizarre, unbidden image of a horned, vaguely hippo-like creature with a goofy grin. The clarity was dizzying. With a roar, Finn renewed his attack, no longer fighting his own demons but only the man in front of him. His movements became fluid, his strikes sure. He was still outmatched, but he was no longer broken. The Stardust Drifter gave a final, mortal groan. A huge tear ripped open in the side of the hull, exposing them to the raging storm of Dagobah's atmosphere. Rain and wind whipped through the cargo hold. "The ship, she dies," Yoda cried out. "To the pod, we must go." Var glanced at the disintegrating ship, then back at Luna, his expression one of pure frustration. He could not capture her and fight both a rejuvenated Finn and Master Yoda while the ship was tearing itself apart. He disengaged, leaping back towards his boarding tube with inhuman agility. "This is not over, Oracle," he yelled over the shriek of the wind. "There is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from destiny." The boarding tube retracted, and Var was gone. "The escape pod is this way," Finn shouted, grabbing Luna's arm. They scrambled through the dying ship, dodging falling ceiling panels and bursts of electrical fire. They piled into the cramped, spherical pod, just as the drifter's primary reactor went critical. Finn slammed the jettison button. With an explosive charge, the pod shot away from the freighter. Through the small viewport, they watched as the Stardust Drifter, Finn's home, his escape, his last connection to a life of cynical solitude, was consumed in a silent, brilliant flash of white-hot light, its debris scattered into the churning clouds of Dagobah. The pod tumbled through the atmosphere, a metal seed falling into an endless swamp. It hit the canopy of a giant, gnarled tree, bounced off with a sickening crunch, and finally plunged into a murky, algae-choked bog with a deafening splash. Water seeped through a hairline crack in the viewport. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows inside the confined space. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths and the rhythmic, gurgling gulp of the swamp outside. Finn leaned his head back against the cold metal wall, his entire body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. His ship was gone. His money was gone. His anonymity was gone. He was stranded on a hostile, unknown world with a cryptic Jedi Master, a girl who saw monsters in the shadows, and a fanatical Inquisitor hunting them from the sky. He was further from his simple, uncomplicated life than he had ever been. He looked over at Luna. She had a small cut on her cheek, but her expression was one of absolute calm. She was gazing at the water seeping through the crack, a tiny, determined trickle of the outside world coming in. "Well," she said, her voice once again filled with its usual dreamy wonder. "This is a bit of a sticky situation, isn't it?" Yoda, perched on a support strut, opened his eyes. He looked at Finn, his ancient gaze piercing the younger man's veil of despair. "A situation, yes," the old master agreed, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Sticky. A beginning, this is." Chapter 3. The Song of the Swamp. The air on Dagobah was less a gas and more a liquid. It clung to Finn's skin, a heavy humid blanket woven from the scents of alien blossoms and ancient decay. Every breath felt like drinking from a warm, mossy stream. Water dripped from every surface, from the broad, leathery leaves of canopy trees that blotted out the sun, from the gnarled roots that twisted like arthritic fingers, and from the tip of Finn's own nose. His ship, the Stardust Drifter, was a ghost behind them now, swallowed by the perpetual twilight and the encroaching jungle. He felt a phantom itch where the ship's familiar grease and ozone scent should have been, replaced by this overwhelming, suffocating life. They had found refuge in the hollow of a colossal, gnarled tree, its interior cavernous and surprisingly dry. A single, wide opening looked out onto a vista of murky water and mist-shrouded boughs. It was defensible, Yoda had decreed, but to Finn, it felt more like a tomb. He paced the confines of their shelter, the packed earth cool beneath his worn boots, his nerves a live wire thrumming with the aftershocks of the Inquisitor's attack. The Gloom-Weavers. He still couldn't shake the image. They weren't creatures of flesh and blood. but knots of pure, predatory darkness given form, their movements an oily violation of physics. He'd fought pirates, mercenaries, and the occasional disgruntled customs official. He knew the brutal logic of a blaster bolt and the cold calculus of a dogfight. But the Gloom-Weavers, they had feasted on fear. His fear. That was a weapon he didn't know how to counter. Patience you lack. Like a Gunda fighting its own tail, your mind spins. A familiar voice chirped. Finn stopped his pacing and glared at the small green figure perched on a mossy root. Master Yoda sat with his eyes closed, his three-fingered hands resting on his jimmer stick, looking as serene as a stone in a riverbed. He seemed to belong here, a natural part of the planet's ancient ecosystem. Patience doesn't fix a hyperdrive motivator that's been slagged by a dark side monstrosity, Finn grumbled, running a hand through his damp hair. Logic does. Spare parts do. Neither of which we have. The ship, a problem it is. The pilot, a greater one. Yoda's eyes opened, ancient and piercing. Sit. The living force sings here. A song of life, of death, of connection. Hear it you must. Finn scoffed. I tried hearing the song for 15 years at the Temple Master. All I ever got was static. He gestured wildly at the swamp outside. This isn't a song. It's a cacophony. Every bug, every slime-covered thing is screaming for attention. It's chaos. Only chaos, you see? Yoda's ears drooped slightly. Your cup is full. Full of what the temple told you the force should be. Empty it. Let the swamp fill it instead. Across the hollow, Luna hummed softly to herself. She was tracing patterns in a patch of damp soil with a slender twig, her silver blonde hair catching the faint, filtered light. She seemed utterly untroubled, as if being stranded on a hostile planet with an Inquisitor hunting them was no more concerning than a misplaced pair of shoes. She hadn't said a word about the attack, but Finn had seen the deep weariness in her eyes before she'd retreated into her own world. She'd faced those things head-on. All right, fine. Finn relented, slumping down cross-legged, his back against the rough bark of the tree. The position was achingly familiar, a muscle memory from 1,000 failed meditation sessions in the sterile halls of the Coruscant Temple. He closed his eyes. What now? Do I listen for the Wrackspurts in the trees? He meant it to be sarcastic, a jab at Luna's eccentricities. But Yoda's reply was utterly serious. If Wrackspurts you hear, then listen to them you should. The Force speaks in a language your heart understands, not the one your mind expects. Finn sighed, a gust of pure frustration. He tried to do as he was taught. Release his tension. Breathe. Reach out with his feelings. The Temple Masters had described it as stilling a pool of water until it was a perfect mirror. But here, the water was a raging flood. The moment he tried to quiet his mind, the swamp crashed in, the thrum of 1,000,000 insect wings. The wet plop of something unseen slipping into the water. The distant, mournful cry of a creature he couldn't name. And beneath it all, a crushing pressure, the sheer unadulterated weight of life. It wasn't just sounds. He could feel the relentless cycle of growth and decay, the silent, desperate struggle of a sapling for light, the slow digestion of a predator in its den. It was too much. A sensory overload that made his teeth ache. He tried to erect the mental shields his masters had taught him, to find a point of stillness in the storm. But it was like trying to build a dam out of sand. The force of Dagobah simply washed over it, through it, and into him. He felt the echoes of the Gloom-Weavers, a cold, greasy stain on the air. He felt Var's presence, a rigid, burning needle of hate and obsession, a discordant note in the planet's symphony. He felt his own failure, a bitter metallic taste at the back of his throat. The memory of the Jedi Council chamber, the disappointed eyes of his master, the crushing weight of the words. Your connection is present, Padawan Rook, but your faith is not. You see the pieces, but you refuse to see the whole. I can't, he gasped, his eyes flying open. Sweat beaded on his forehead. It's too loud. I can't find a center. Yoda hadn't moved. A center you seek. Like the hub of a wheel. But what if the force here is not a wheel? What if it is a river? You do not find a center in a river. You flow with it. That's just more riddles. Finn shot back, his voice raw. How am I supposed to flow when I'm drowning? Perhaps, a soft voice interjected, you're not meant to swim. You're meant to float. He turned. Luna was looking at him, her large, silvery eyes holding a curious, gentle expression. She had abandoned her drawings and was now holding a small, iridescent beetle on her fingertip, watching it crawl. The swamp doesn't try to be quiet for you, she said, her voice a dreamy whisper. It sings its song, and if you shout at it, you'll only make yourself hoarse. You have to hum along. She tilted her head, and the beetle flew from her finger, its wings a blur of emerald and blue. That's what the Gloom-Weavers do. They don't have a song. They just scream. It's why everything goes quiet when they're near. They're trying to silence the music. Finn stared at her. It was the most ridiculous, un-Jedi-like explanation he had ever heard. And yet, it resonated with a strange, simple truth. He had been trying to impose order, to force the vibrant, chaotic energy of Dagobah into the neat, predictable boxes of his temple training. He was shouting at the swamp. Before he could process the thought, the atmosphere in the hollow shifted. It was subtle at first. A sudden chill that had nothing to do with the dampness. The ceaseless chittering of insects outside faded, not into silence, but into a tense, expectant hush. Finn felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. He instinctively reached for the blaster holstered at his side, his eyes scanning the misty clearing outside their shelter. Master Yoda, he said, his voice low. But Yoda wasn't looking outside. He was looking at Luna. Luna stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on a point in the middle of the air. Her dreamy expression was gone, replaced by a profound, unnerving vacancy. Her eyes, usually so full of wonder, were like clouded glass, reflecting a world only she could see. A faint tremor ran through her. Luna. Finn took a step toward her. Stay, Yoda commanded, his tone sharp, his hand held up to halt Finn's advance. Witness you must. Do not interfere. Luna's lips parted and she began to speak, but her voice was different. It was distant, layered, like an echo from a deep well. The man of straight lines is building a cage, she whispered. The air grew colder, and Finn could swear he saw his breath mist. Not of metal. Not of stone. A cage of thirst. Finn glanced at Yoda, a question in his eyes. Yoda's ears were perked, his focus absolute. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, urging Finn to listen. He found a place where the world drinks the light. Luna continued, her voice gaining a strange rhythm, a cadence of prophecy. A heart of stone, deep in the dark. It's a quiet place. A listening place. But he's teaching it a new word. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He's feeding it shadows. The Gloom-Weavers are gathering. They wriggle into the cracks of the heart and drink. 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 They are making the stone sick. Finn felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't the rambling of an eccentric girl. This was something else. He could feel the power coiling in the air around her, a static charge that made his teeth hurt. The song, it's turning sour, she murmured, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. He is twisting the roots. The cage will close, and the stars inside will forget how to shine. He wants to make a weapon. A weapon of silence. Her body shuddered violently, and she gasped, her eyes clearing. She stumbled, and Finn lurched forward, catching her by the shoulders before she could fall. She felt impossibly light and cold to the touch. Luna, are you alright? What did you see? He asked, his voice urgent. She blinked up at him, her gaze slowly refocusing. The Nargles are very upset, she said weakly. He's hurting the trees from the inside out. Finn gritted his teeth, his frustration boiling over. Nargles? Luna, we don't have time for this. A man of straight lines? A thirsty cage? What does any of that mean? It means, Yoda said, his voice grim as he hobbled closer, that our Inquisitor is a greater fool than I thought. Yoda looked from Luna to Finn, his old eyes dark with ancient knowledge. A place that drinks the light. A heart of stone. A force nexus she speaks of. A vergence in the force, strong with the light side. Rare they are. Powerful. The pieces clicked into place in Finn's mind. the abstract poetry of Luna's vision suddenly crystallizing into horrifyingly logical strategy. A force nexus was like an amplifier, a place where the veil between the physical and the metaphysical was thin. He'd read about them in the archives, places of pilgrimage, of healing, of profound meditation. He's not just here for her, Finn breathed, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He's trying to corrupt it, to turn a place of light into a wellspring for the dark side. Worse, Yoda corrected, tapping his Jimmer stick on the packed earth for emphasis. A weapon, she said. A weapon of silence. He seeks to control it, to sever this world's connection to the living force. Create a dead zone. A fortress from which the dark side can spread, unopposed. The man of straight lines. Inquisitor Kalen Var. The former archivist. Of course, it made a twisted kind of sense. Var wasn't a brute. He was a scholar. He wasn't just trying to smash his enemies. He was trying to unwrite the rules of the universe to suit his own rigid ideology. He wanted to control the future by caging the Force itself. "We have to stop him," Finn said, the words coming out before he had a chance to second-guess them. The cynicism, the desire to run, was still there, a bitter taste in his mouth. But it was overshadowed by the chilling clarity of Luna's vision and the sheer, blasphemous audacity of Var's plan. He had wanted to escape the grand, cosmic struggle. Now, it had taken root in the mud at his feet. Luna, seeming to have recovered her strength, looked up at him. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by an unwavering resolve that startled him. "His cage has a lock," she said, her voice clear and sure. "I saw it. It's a crystal. A cracked crystal that weeps darkness." Yoda nodded slowly. The heart of his corruption. The focus he will use to poison the Nexus. Destroy the focus, and his cage will crumble. Finn's mind raced, processing tactical information, plotting vectors, calculating risks. For the first time since they'd crashed, he wasn't just a stranded pilot. He was a Padawan again, albeit a failed one, facing an enemy of the Jedi Order. The objective was clear. Find the Nexus. Find the focus. Destroy it. But a cold knot of his old insecurity tightened in his gut. He had failed the trials because he couldn't trust in the unseen, couldn't make that leap of faith. And now his entire plan, their only hope, was based on a girl's dream about a thirsty stone and a crying crystal. He looked at Luna, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. He looked at Yoda, whose expression was one of solemn expectation. They were counting on him. He was the pilot, the fighter, the one with the blaster and the half-remembered training. He was their only defense. "If we're going to do this," Finn said, his voice hardening into a tool of pragmatic resolve, "we need a plan. Where is this Nexus?" Yoda closed his eyes, tilting his head as if listening to a distant melody. "The Song of the Swamp. Listen, Finn. Where it sings loudest, there, you will find the Heart of Stone." He opened his eyes and pointed his Jimmer stick out of the hollow, towards the deepest, darkest part of the jungle. "And where the song now chokes on a note of fear there, you will find the Inquisitor." Chapter 4. The air in the deep swamp grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay and rebirth. Every squelch of Finn's worn boots in the mud felt like a drumbeat marking their slow march toward a confrontation he was in no way prepared for. Above, the canopy of gnarled trees was a dense, interlocking ceiling that blotted out the sky, plunging the world into a perpetual twilight. Luminescent fungi cast an ethereal blue-green glow on their path, painting strange, shifting shadows on the moss-draped branches that drooped like the arms of tired old men. Finnian Rook, the man who had run to the farthest reaches of the galaxy to escape the Force, was now walking willingly into its heart. He glanced over his shoulder. Yoda, perched on a twisted root, seemed to be in a light trance, his small, three-fingered hands resting on his Jimmer stick, his large eyes closed. He was the picture of serenity, a stark contrast to the frantic thrumming in Finn's own chest. A few steps behind, Luna Lovegood trailed a hand through a curtain of hanging moss, her silver eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and concern. She hummed a soft, aimless tune, as if she were on a pleasant stroll rather than an urgent mission. "He's making the route sad," she said, her voice a dreamy whisper that cut through the swamp's oppressive silence. The blibbering humdingers that nest in them have all flown away. Finn gritted his teeth. A week ago, he would have dismissed the comment as the ramblings of a spaced-out passenger. Now, he understood it was a translation. The life energy of this place, the Nexus, was being twisted, corrupted. Var was already at work. How much farther, Master Yoda? Finn asked, keeping his voice low. Yoda's eyes snapped open. Close we are. Feel the chill, can you not? A shadow that does not belong. Finn could feel it. It wasn't a physical cold, but a hollowing sensation in his gut, a static against his skin. It was the dark side, not in the abstract, theoretical way his Jedi instructors had described it, but as a palpable, predatory presence. It felt like the air before a lightning strike, charged and dangerous. He instinctively reached for the lightsaber clipped to his belt. The weapon felt both alien and familiar, a relic of a life he'd tried to bury. He'd spent years convincing himself he wasn't worthy of it, that the Force had judged him and found him lacking. Now, it was his only real tool against a man who wielded the Force like a scalpel. The Crumple-Horned Snorkack is very shy, Luna added, her gaze fixed on a point deep in the misty gloom ahead. It doesn't like loud noises. It prefers to be approached with a kind heart and, if you have one, a gilly water infusion. Finn's brow furrowed. Luna, we're going up against an Inquisitor, not trying to tame a pet. A problem. See it as you do, Yoda interjected, hopping down from the root with a soft thud. A lesson she is giving you. Rigid your mind is, Finnian Rook. Like a dam, you hold back the river. But a river, always it finds a way. Or breaks the dam. Finn fell silent, chewing on the cryptic words. Asterisk don't be loud. Approach with a kind heart. Asterisk it was absurd. Var was a zealot who had tried to kill them, who hunted seers to chain them to his own mad vision of the future. How was he supposed to approach that with anything other than a lit lightsaber? They came to a clearing dominated by a colossal, ancient tree. Its trunk was so wide it would have taken 20 men to encircle it, and its roots were like massive, petrified serpents plunging into the dark, murky water of the swamp. At its base was a yawning cave mouth, a black wound in the living wood. The coldness emanated from within, a tangible wave of malice. This was the Nexus. He's in there, Luna whispered, pointing. He's trying to teach the cave a new, horrible song. Finn drew his lightsaber. The familiar snap hiss of the blue blade igniting cut through the air, casting a stark, artificial light on the primeval scene. Stay here with Yoda. Both of you. Go alone you will not, Yoda stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Your shield I will be. Her eyes she will be. Finn looked from the determined old master to the strangely serene young woman, and felt a surge of protectiveness that startled him. These two oddballs, this cryptic frog and the girl who saw monsters in the Force, had become his responsibility. More than that, they had become his crew. The thought was as terrifying as it was grounding. He nodded curtly. All right. But stay behind me. He moved forward, stepping into the oppressive aura of the cave. The air inside was thick and smelled of ozone and damp stone. The blue-green glow of the swamp was replaced by a sinister red light pulsating from deep within. The walls of the cave were not bare rock, but a lattice of interwoven roots, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. As they moved deeper, the whispers began. Not audible sounds, but impressions pressed directly into his mind. Images of his failure at the Jedi trials, the scornful look on his master's face, the crushing weight of his own inadequacy, the voices of those who called him a washout, a failure. He stumbled, the old wounds tearing open. Heliopaths, Luna said softly from behind him. They feast on doubt. Don't listen to their whispers, Finn. They're just echoes. Tell them you're busy. Finn clenched his jaw. Tell them you're busy. It was the most ridiculous piece of advice he'd ever heard, yet he focused on it. He pushed the old pains aside, not by fighting them, but by simply acknowledging them and setting them aside. I'm busy. He took another step, his footing more certain. The whispers faded into a dull hiss. They reached the heart of the Nexus. It was a large, circular cavern. In the center, Inquisitor Kalen Var stood before a pool of water that shimmered with an unnatural, blood-red light. The water, which should have been reflecting the life of the Nexus, was being twisted, corrupted. Var had placed several artifacts around the pool. A Sith holocron that bled dark energy, and to Finn's horror, a Jedi holocron, its crystalline structure now cracked and weeping a dark ichor. Var, his face pale and fanatical in the crimson glow, held his hands over the pool, chanting in a low, guttural language. He didn't seem to notice them at first, so consumed was he by his ritual. Var. Finn's voice was a sharp crack in the humming silence. The Inquisitor turned slowly. There was no surprise on his face, only a weary annoyance. His gray eyes, the eyes of a scholar, were burning with a cold fire. The failed Padawan, Var said, his voice echoing in the cavern. I should have known you wouldn't have the sense to simply run. You've brought the girl. Good. She can bear witness to the new order I am creating. You're poisoning this place, Finn growled, raising his lightsaber. Poisoning? Var gave a dry, mirthless laugh. I am bringing it clarity. The living force is a chaotic, untamed mess. It allows for infinite, contradictory futures. It is the engine of chaos, of war, of suffering. I am merely editing it, pruning the possibilities. With this nexus under my control, I can refine the flow of destiny itself. No more uncertainty. No more unforeseen tragedies. Only the path I have chosen. He gestured to the corrupted pool. I am saving the galaxy from itself. The girl could have been my greatest tool. Her sight is raw, powerful. Properly focused, she could have helped me chart the perfect future. Instead, you have her chasing fairy tales. The Nargles are stealing the light from the roots, Luna said, her voice clear and unafraid. Var's eyes narrowed at her. What nonsense is this? But Finn understood. The roots. He glanced down. Dark, tendril-like shadows were creeping from the artifacts, snaking across the floor and into the woven root walls of the cavern, draining the life from them. Var wasn't just corrupting the pool. He was siphoning the very foundation of the Nexus. Your order is a cage, Var. Finn shot back, his own words surprising him. He was echoing Yoda, but the sentiment felt like his own. The Force isn't a text to be edited. You can't control it. The archivist who cannot control his collection is no archivist at all, Var retorted, his own crimson lightsaber leaping into his hand. It was a standard Inquisitor model, but he wielded it with the cold, precise economy of a duelist who had memorized every form. I will show you the price of your sentimentality. He lunged. Finn met his attack, blue blade crashing against red. The impact sent a shower of sparks into the dark air. Var's style was exactly as Finn expected. Rigid, perfect, and utterly predictable. Form 3, Sorisu. The textbook defensive style, executed with flawless precision. Every parry was perfect, every riposte calculated. It was like fighting a droid, but a very, very skilled droid. Finn was driven back, his own form, a more aggressive Ataru, feeling sloppy and unrefined in comparison. The whispers of failure returned, stronger this time. Asterisk, you're not good enough. You never were asterisk. See, Var hissed, pressing his advantage. You are undisciplined. A half-trained child flailing in the dark. You failed the trials because you lacked conviction. You lack it still. Finn's boots slipped on the slick stone floor. Var's blade sliced downward, aimed at his shoulder. The Grindilo is reaching for your ankle, Finn. Luna's voice cried out. It was insane. There were no Grindilos here. But without thinking, purely on instinct, Finn threw himself into a roll to his left, away from the phantom creature at his ankle. Var's saber hissed through the space where his shoulder had been, striking the stone floor with a screech of superheated rock. Finn came up on one knee, breathing heavily. He hadn't dodged because of his training. He hadn't seen the attack coming with the Force. He had dodged because Luna told him a water demon was grabbing his foot. He looked at her. Her eyes were unfocused, seeing the battle not as it was, but as a storybook of strange creatures. And in that moment, something inside Finn finally broke free. The damn Yoda had spoken of. He had spent his whole life trying to make the Force fit into logical, predictable boxes. Var was doing the same, just on a galactic scale. Both of them were wrong. The Force wasn't a set of rules. It was a story. And for the first time, Finn was ready to listen. "Tell me the story, Luna," he said, his voice low but steady. Var paused, a look of confusion on his face. "Have you gone mad?" "He's a bully," Luna said, her voice gaining strength. "He's built a cage of dark spells, but the Diracals can pop in and out whenever they please." Finn's eyes darted around the cavern. A cage of dark spells. Var's movements were perfect, but they were also restrictive. He never moved outside a specific perimeter around the corrupted pool. He was defending it. The Diracals can pop in and out, teleporting birds. That meant there had to be a weak point, a way to get past his defense. Finn changed his stance. He stopped trying to beat Var at his own game. He abandoned the formal sequences of Ataru and let his body move, fueled by the Force and guided by Luna's bizarre narration. "He's weaving a web," Luna called out. Var unleashed a flurry of rapid strikes, and Finn, instead of meeting them blade to blade, ducked and weaved, letting the red blade sing past him. The gulping Plimpies are nibbling at the shiny stones. Finn's gaze shot to the artifacts. The Sith holocron. The Jedi holocron. The sources of the corruption. That was the target. Not Var. He feinted high, drawing Var's perfect, textbook parry. But instead of following through, Finn dropped low and hurled his lightsaber. It wasn't a move from any Jedi manual. It was a desperate, pragmatic pilot's throw. The spinning blue blade flew past Var, not at him, but at the cracked Jedi holocron. Var cried out in rage and broke his perfect stance, lunging to intercept the blade with the Force. But he had created his own prison. By tying his energy to the corruption ritual, he had anchored himself. His Force push was sluggish, too slow. Finn's saber struck the Jedi holocron. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The cavern screamed. The corrupted energy, suddenly severed from its conduit, imploded. A shockwave of pure, untainted force erupted from the shattered holocron. It wasn't dark, it wasn't light. It was just raw, primal power, the untamed life of Dagobah reclaiming its heart. The red glow of the pool vanished, replaced by a blinding white light. Var was thrown back like a doll, his concentration shattered, his ritual broken. He slammed against the far wall and collapsed, his lightsaber clattering to the stone. The dark tendrils receded from the walls, and the oppressive cold in the air vanished, replaced by the warm, humid thrum of life. Finn stood panting, the Force washing over him not as a test or a tool, but as a welcoming presence. It felt like coming home. He recalled his lightsaber to his hand, the familiar way to comfort now, not a burden. He walked over to the groaning Inquisitor. Var was clutching his head, his fanaticism replaced by the agonized look of a man whose entire worldview had just been detonated. "It's Fes," Var stammered, looking at the now clear pool of water. "All my work, undone." "You tried to dam a river, Var," Finn said, his voice quiet. "The river won." Before he could decide what to do with the defeated Inquisitor, a low groan echoed from the entrance of the cave. A section of the root ceiling, destabilized by the energy backlash, cracked and began to fall. "Leave him," Yoda's sharp voice commanded. "Go. Now." Finn didn't hesitate. He scooped Luna up. She was so light she felt like she was made of moonlight and air, and sprinted for the entrance, Yoda hobbling surprisingly fast behind him. They burst out into the swampy twilight just as the cave mouth collapsed with a deafening roar, sealing Kalen Var inside the now-purified nexus. "Safe for now." Finn gently set Luna down. She looked up at him, a radiant smile on her face. "The Snorkack is happy again," she said. "It's humming." Finn listened. And beneath the chirps and croaks of the swamp, he could feel it too. A deep, resonant hum of life, of balance restored. He looked at his hands, then at the lightsaber. He hadn't won with perfect form or overwhelming power. He had won by trusting the girl who saw magic in a universe he had tried to reduce to simple mechanics. Yoda came to stand beside him, leaning on his Jimmer stick. "A great victory this is. Found your own path, you have." Finn felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. It wasn't the pride of passing a test. It was the quiet confidence of knowing his place. We did it. Yes, Yoda said, his ears twitching. He turned his gaze from the collapsed cave to the sky above the canopy, a profound seriousness settling on his features. Done it is. But a price. Victory always has. Finn followed his gaze, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. What do you mean? Yoda poked a finger toward the sky. A stone. We have thrown into a quiet pond. But this pond, it stretches across the galaxy. The Jedi Master's eyes met Finn's, and they held a gravity that chilled him to the bone. The ripple you have made, Finnian Rook, felt it will be, not just by the Inquisitor's masters, but by the Jedi as well. Coming for the girl, they will all be now.